When I came home that Wednesday, there were 3 candles lit on the kitchen island, a handwritten checklist on the fridge, and a woman named Arlena wearing a white robe like she was about to baptize me or sue me. She looked me in the eye and said, "We need to assess your progress before the 3rd moon cycle." I was holding a rotisserie chicken. Let me back up. I'd been married to Arlena for 2 years. We lived together, paid taxes together. We shared a Costco membership. But somewhere between our wedding and this exact Wednesday, I was apparently demoted from husband to provisional life partner. She said the trial period had begun without formal announcement. Said it was energetically initiated during an argument we had over dishwasher placement. Apparently, when I told her not everything needs to be pre-rinsed, she took that as a sign that I dismiss sacred processes. I thought she was just mad about the cutlery tray. Turns out, she was documenting me. For 90 days. In secret, she had a color-coded chart on her iPad titled, Wesley, Trial Phase Metrics. I know because she left it open when she went to bless the dog's aura in the backyard. My name, Wesley, was in bold red, and the categories included voice modulation during conflict, willingness to awaken, spontaneity, non-sexual, masculine containment aura. Under that last one, she had written, flickering, at times swampy, possibly inherited from paternal line. I had never felt so evaluated in my own home, not even at my last job, and that job made me wear a lanyard that said Dev intern for 11 months after I got promoted. She wasn't just tracking me. She had a review committee, not officially, but from the little I gathered, it included her friend Jasmine, who called me low frequency after I brought store-bought salad to Friendsgiving, her therapist/shaman, Vaughn, who speaks in riddles and once told me I smell like cognitive rigidity, and her ex, Cedric, who is still in her life for emotional closure loops. Cedric drives a Tesla and says things like real men make space, not demands. Meanwhile, I once cried because my cat sat on my lap while I was depressed, and I took it as a sign from the universe that I wasn't entirely worthless. I'm not built for emotional battlegrounds. I just want someone who doesn't roll their eyes when I say I miss Blockbuster. But here I was, in my own kitchen, holding a rotisserie chicken and realizing my marriage had been secretly turned into a trial subscription. I confronted her. I said, "Arlena, what is this? Am I on some spiritual probation?" She didn't even blink. She said, "This is not punishment. This is calibration. You're being assessed for alignment." Then she handed me a warm glass of oat milk and told me to sit in stillness and reflect. So I sat, and I reflected on the fact that I once gave up meat for this woman, that I read 3 entire books about attachment styles because she said I had the emotional range of a traffic cone, that I apologized for energetically suffocating her because I hugged her after she had a stressful Zoom call, and now I was being rated like a hotel on Yelp. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not just because she was doing breath work at 2 a.m. while diffusing eucalyptus oil, but because I realized something terrifying. I had been fighting to impress someone who no longer saw me as human, just a project in progress. The 90-day trial had a start date. It also needed an end. And if she wasn't going to end it, I would. I just needed to wait for the right moment. And maybe get a printer. Because the final review I had planned would be delivered in writing. The next morning, I woke up to a note on the bathroom mirror. Not a sweet little love note like the ones Arlena used to write before our wedding, but a laminated affirmation taped next to my toothbrush that read, "The feminine does not bloom in suffocating soil." Underneath it, in her handwriting, she'd added, "Please reflect on how your presence is affecting the ecosystem of our union." I stood there, mouth tasting like dried oat milk, wondering if I'd just been metaphorically called a weed. Then I opened the fridge. My leftover pizza was gone, replaced by a glass container labeled Intention Soup. It was green, vaguely slimy. A note on top warned, "Do not consume if resisting energetic realignment." It finally hit me. My life wasn't just being evaluated, it was being redecorated from the inside out. Like she was Marie Kondo-ng my entire personality, and waiting to see if I sparked enough joy to keep around. That day, I worked from home. She insisted I use her old standing desk because sitting compresses your sacral creativity. I didn't argue. I stood for 8 hours with numb legs and resentment building in my knees. At one point, I made the mistake of humming along to a YouTube playlist. She walked by, paused, and said, You're holding a lot of throat chakra tension today. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I stopped humming, which somehow made it worse. Later that evening, she asked if I had journaled on my disruptive patterns. I asked what she meant, and she pulled out a list. A literal list. Things she had apparently been writing down during these silent periods of reflection she scheduled into our week without telling me. I looked at the paper. Bullet points like, uses humor to avoid depth. Micro dismisses intuitive suggestions. Still skeptical of energetic portals. Forgets to bless food before eating. I read it 3 times, hoping it was a joke. It wasn't. Arlena watched me with the calm, calculated patience of someone who truly believed this was helpful. Like she was giving me a performance review and expecting me to nod, accept the feedback, and go back to doing shadow work on the couch. I tried to keep it together. I really did. I smiled. I nodded. I said thank you. But something cracked open inside me when she added, almost casually, "Oh, and Cedric said he still senses a tightness in your lower back. That could indicate lingering resentment toward the feminine." Cedric, the ex, the walking essential oil ad who somehow still had access to my wife's spiritual development, and now, apparently, to my body language. I asked, carefully, why Cedric was analyzing me like a wildlife documentary. She looked at me like I'd asked why water is wet. Because he's emotionally attuned and holds masculine space without ego. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "Is Cedric part of my review process?" She paused, thought about it, then nodded. "He's just one of the mirrors." So to recap, I was in a marriage-turned-mystical internship, being observed by a committee that included her ex-boyfriend, a shaman therapist hybrid who speaks in riddles, and a best friend who once told me I looked like a man who doesn't dream. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the closed toilet seat, breathing slowly. Not to meditate, just to survive. I looked at my own reflection and whispered, "What the hell is happening?" And that's when I remembered something she said during our honeymoon, back when things were still real. We were lying on a hammock in Tulum, drunk on mezcal and sun. She'd leaned over and said, "You're the first man I don't want to fix." It was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. Now here I was, broken down into metrics and moon phases. I had 26 days left in this so-called trial. I started counting backward like a prisoner scratching tallies into the wall. But deep down I knew I couldn't make it that long, not without losing myself entirely. It was time to start planning. Quietly, carefully, calculated not with anger, but with clarity. Because if she wanted a final evaluation, I would give her one. But not before I turned the tables. There's something strange that happens when you live under constant evaluation. You stop thinking like yourself. Every move becomes a calculation. Every word gets run through a mental filter that asks, will this be logged? Will this be seen as evolved? Will this affect my score? And I hated myself for it, but I started adapting. Not to win her love back. Somewhere, deep down, I knew that was already gone. No, I started adapting to buy time. Because now I had a plan. I was going to make it to the end of her ridiculous little trial. Not to pass it, not to earn her approval, but to flip the script. And to do that, I had to become what she wanted, at least on the surface. So I gave her what she needed. I started nodding more, smiling on cue, speaking less. I began repeating phrases like, "I received that," and "I see how that landed for you." I let her believe I was finally dropping into my feminine receptivity. Meanwhile, I was quietly documenting everything. Screenshots of her trial notes, voice memos of her lectures, photos of the ridiculous laminated affirmations she left around the house like emotional landmines. If she was running an evaluation, I was running a counter-evaluation. And mine didn't pull any punches. The turning point came on day 68. We were having dinner in silence. Intentionally, of course. She called it sacred stillness dining. I called it eating cold lentils without blinking. She stared at me like she was trying to read the lines in my forehead for ancestral trauma. Then, mid-chew, she looked up and said, "You're becoming easier to hold space for." I said thank you. She smiled and added, "Cedric noticed it too." And that was it. That was the moment. Something inside me snapped. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded again, calmly. But inside I felt this cold clarity click into place. Like watching a fire go out and finally seeing the ashes for what they are, evidence that something used to burn, and now it doesn't. That night, after she went to bed, listening to a 10-hour recording of womb frequency tones. I went into the guest room and opened my laptop. I pulled up everything I'd documented: the trial agreement, the committee involvement, the rating sheets, the coded language. And I started writing. Not a letter, not an argument, but something simpler. A single line. My review. But I wasn't going to send it yet. No, I needed something more theatrical. Something worthy of the ridiculous circus my marriage had become. I remembered Arlena saying once, "Energy is everything. Words are just packaging." So I figured, why not give her a package? Over the next few days, I started preparing. I printed the entire trial agreement, highlighted the absurdities in neon yellow, and spiral-bound it like a corporate training manual. I even titled the front, "Feedback from Your Beta Husband," a retrospective. I ordered a miniature trophy online that read, "World's Worst Performance Review." And the final touch, inside the last page of the packet, I added my response in size 72 font, centered, bold, unmissable. Position eliminated. I wasn't sure exactly when I'd give it to her, but I knew I would. And it wouldn't be in a fight. No yelling. No drama. I'd deliver it with the same flat, composed energy she always weaponized against me. I'd deliver it in silence, the same way she'd slowly dismantled my dignity over the past 3 months, with small, subtle, irreversible cuts. And just when I thought I had everything under control, just when I started to believe I might get out of this with my sanity intact, something happened that I didn't expect. I found a second trial packet, but it wasn't about me. It was about someone else. Someone new. Someone currently being considered for post-trial elevation. I found it by accident. It was buried inside a folder on Arlena's laptop titled Temple Curriculum. Normally, I wouldn't touch her computer. She called it her digital altar, and once snapped at me for adjusting the screen brightness without permission from the space. But I'd been trying to find a PDF invoice for a repair guy, and her desktop was a minefield of vaguely threatening folders. Ceremony blueprints. Inner union agenda. Masculine repatterning slides. And then there it was, a folder labeled simply Theo. I clicked it. Inside were 6 documents, all with timestamps from the past 2 months. My hands got cold as I opened the first one. It was titled, Initial Compatibility Scan, Potential Union 002. The next file? Voice Notes, Field Observations. Then, Boundary Play Reflections, Private. By the time I opened the third file, my throat had gone dry. It was a literal trial packet. Like mine, but more detailed. More hopeful. Like she was doing all the things she had stopped doing with me. Tracking joy, attraction, play, flirtation. The tone was different. Lighter. Anticipatory. And in one voice note, she even giggled. Giggled. I hadn't heard that sound in months. Not since the early days, back when I still made her laugh with dumb jokes about astrology and took her on spontaneous midnight drives to nowhere. Back when I was still auditioning, but at least I felt like the only one in the room. Now I realized, I wasn't even the main applicant anymore. Theo was younger. I recognized his name. He'd been tagged in a few of her spiritual summit posts. Some shirtless guy who looked like he sells essential oils in between doing CrossFit and tweeting about tantric sovereignty. He was everything I wasn't: bold, edgy, supposedly unshakably grounded in his divine masculine. A line she once used to describe me, before she started calling me heady and uncentered. I scrolled further and found a schedule. Actual calendar blocks. Color-coded. Sunday. Theo breathwork container, non-sexual, exploratory. Tuesday. Check-in with Wesley re. Father wounds and scarcity vibration. Friday. Ecstatic dance with Theo, observational. I wasn't her partner. I was a case study. A control group. Theo was the main event. And the worst part? She hadn't even ended the trial with me. She was still evaluating me while simultaneously warming up another candidate, and doing it with the calm, detached logic of someone organizing an HR restructure, not a marriage. It didn't even feel like cheating. It felt like corporate betrayal. I closed the laptop and just sat there on the floor for a long time, trying to feel something clear: anger, heartbreak, anything. But what I felt most was small, like a placeholder in someone else's real story. Like a man standing on stage, delivering lines for an audience that had already walked out. That night, I didn't say a word to her. We shared the same dinner table, just like every other forced stillness session, except now I was wearing a different mask. She thought I was being deeply present. I was just dissociating with incredible skill. She complimented me, said my energy felt more integrated lately. I smiled, told her I'd been doing a lot of reflection. She didn't know that reflection involved backing up everything I'd found onto a private drive. Not to blackmail her, not even to confront her, but because I wanted to remember this moment for what it was. The moment I officially stopped trying to earn her love. The rest of the trial became a performance. I played the part of the devoted, awakened man. I journaled about embodiment and sacred agreements and offered to lead our communication ceremony on day 74. I even wrote a poem about the moon. It rhymed. Badly. She cried. Inside, I was building the ending. And it would come not with rage, but with precision. I'd play my final card on day 90, exactly at sundown, during her closing ritual. Because if she wanted a symbolic conclusion, I was going to give her one she'd never forget. By day 84, something strange started happening. I no longer flinched when she said things like, "Cedric had a dream about your root chakra," or, "This week, let's only communicate through sacred eye contact." I'd stopped reacting because, by that point, I'd stopped expecting anything resembling normal. When you're submerged in enough spiritual jargon, your brain stops processing it as nonsense and just files it under ambient noise. Arlena's words became the hum of a refrigerator, constant, annoying, but ultimately ignorable. And yet, behind my frozen mask of surrender, I was moving, preparing, planning, adjusting. I had rehearsed my exit a dozen times in my head. Day 90. Sunset. Her favorite part of the day. The moment she always claimed was the energetic hinge between the seen and the unseen. I was going to make that hinge slam shut. I'd pre-written a letter, not to her, but to myself. A reminder of who I was before this whole thing. Before I let someone shrink me down to a checklist, reduce my self-worth to moon phases and throat chakra tightness. I'd sealed it in an envelope and left it hidden behind the loose baseboard in the guest room, just in case I ever needed to return and dig myself back out. The plan was simple. On day 90, during her closing union reflection ritual, I'd hand her the bound copy of her absurd trial agreement, annotated by me, with brutal honesty, and say nothing. Just slide it across the floor like a mic drop made of paper. And then, taped to the final page, she'd find the line I'd been waiting to deliver for weeks. Position eliminated. No fight. No goodbye. Just closure in the same cold, methodical format she'd used to dissect our relationship. But the universe, or Arlena, which sometimes felt like the same thing, had other plans. On the morning of day 85, I came downstairs and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by white candles and dried flowers. Her eyes were closed, her hands resting on her knees, palms up. There was something ceremonial about the way she was breathing, as if the air itself had been rehearsed. She opened her eyes slowly and said, "I've made a decision." I played dumb. About what? She smiled like a kindergarten teacher about to give me a sticker. About us. About your evaluation. You passed. I blinked. I passed. She nodded, looking so proud of herself I wanted to throw a chair through the window. I've decided to offer you a new role. My mouth dried up. Role. Co-steward of the temple. That was it. That was the title. Not husband. Not partner. Not even sacred union companion. Co-steward of the temple. Like I'd just been promoted in a company I never applied to. I asked what that meant. She said it meant we'd begin a new phase of collaboration, building retreats together, offering workshops on wounded masculine redemption arcs, and, eventually, co-authoring a book called From Beta to Beloved. She said she'd already drafted the first chapter. She wanted me to write my origin story and include a section about how I healed through her guidance. And the most horrifying part? She genuinely believed she'd fixed me. She said, "You're no longer who you were. That man was heavy. You're light now." It hit me like a freight train made of lavender incense and delusion. She didn't even see me anymore. The version of me she claimed to love, the one who meditated, journaled, swallowed his anger, and nodded on cue, was a persona I built just to survive her. And she mistook it for progress. I nodded, slowly, and said, "Thank you for your trust." She glowed. I died a little inside, because now I had a problem. If she believed the trial was over and the verdict was positive, then day 90 would no longer have the weight I needed. There would be no ritual, no closure moment, No sunset hinge. Just a smooth transition into a permanent role I never wanted, chained to a woman who thought I was a project completed. So I had to pivot. I needed a new exit strategy, something faster, sharper, quieter. And it had to happen before she pulled me deeper into her web of ceremonies and performance reviews and co-branded trauma healing seminars. That night, I canceled all my online accounts, transferred money into an untouchable checking account under my old high school nickname, and booked a one-way ticket to my brother's place in Oregon. I'd leave before she woke up, before she lit her morning sage, before Cedric could send her another dream interpretation about my emotional constipation. I printed out my final message, trimmed it with a paper cutter, and slipped it into the center of the trial binder. I placed the binder on her altar, dead center, where she'd be sure to see it. Then I took my duffel bag and walked out the front door with no shoes, no ceremony, and no regret. But just as I stepped outside, I saw something on the porch. A box, medium-sized, wrapped in purple paper. No note. I opened it. Inside was a handmade rope and a card. For your first day as co-steward. With love, A. And beneath that, written in a different pen, P.S. I canceled Theo's trial. He wasn't ready, but you are. I stood there in the cold, barefoot, holding a robe I never wanted and a title I never asked for. And for the first time in months, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was finally absolutely insane. And I was finally absolutely done. I didn't sleep that night. Not in the Uber to the airport, not on the plane, not even once I landed in Oregon and collapsed into the extra-long couch in my brother's unfinished basement, surrounded by exercise equipment no one used and motivational posters left by the previous tenant. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the hum of the water heater and the faint sound of my brother snoring upstairs, wondering what part of me had died back there, and if it needed a funeral or just a quiet burial. I hadn't texted Arlena. I hadn't left a voicemail. All I left was the binder, her own twisted creation, now laced with commentary, corrections, sarcasm, and, finally, that single line in bold. Position eliminated. It wasn't rage. It was a review. A formal severance letter from a man who'd been restructured out of his own marriage. I figured she'd get the message. Probably light some Palo Santo, cry for 5 minutes, call Cedric for an emergency resonance reset, and then post a cryptic quote about grief on her Instagram story. What I didn't expect was what came next. It started with a text from my neighbor 2 days after I left. Hey, everything okay? Your wife was outside your house screaming into a crystal and talking to your tree. I called him immediately. He said Arlena showed up barefoot, wearing what he described as ceremonial robes or maybe curtains, and spent 20 minutes pacing the yard, muttering phrases like betrayal is an invitation and the masculine collapse must be witnessed. Then she took a selfie, laid down on the lawn in corpse pose, and left. I thought maybe that would be it. A meltdown, a post, and then silence. But on the 3rd day, my email started blowing up. First, it was a message from Jasmine, her spiritual advisor friend, titled, "You're choosing ego over evolution." Inside was a 3-paragraph essay explaining how my departure was a trauma reenactment rooted in avoidant attachment patterns, and that by walking out without participating in the closure integration ceremony, I had destabilized Arlena's sacral field and set back her healing journey by at least 3 lunar cycles. Then came the emails from her followers. Apparently, Arlena had gone live on Instagram, and announced that her life partner had abandoned the temple on the eve of their co-stewardship ascension ceremony. She spoke tearfully about how she'd poured 3 years of divine devotion into cultivating masculine safety, only to be ghosted by the very container she helped birth. She never mentioned my name, but she showed the binder. My binder, the one I had marked up, page by page, with brutal honesty. The sarcastic comments. The jokes about Cedric. The part where I wrote, "No adult man should be rated on his womb-safe energy." She showed it all. And then, in the most surreal twist of all, she claimed she would be selling copies. As a healing tool. I thought I was hallucinating. But no, there it was. A link on her website. New, the Sacred Exit Binder, $44, 44/digital PDF. Includes bonus worksheet, how to alchemize abandonment. She turned my exit into merch, and people were buying it. By the end of the week, She had over 200 comments praising her courageous vulnerability and transformational leadership in heartbreak. Meanwhile, I was hiding in my brother's basement, eating string cheese and Googling whether it's legal to trademark a phrase like position eliminated. And yet, as ridiculous as it all was, part of me wasn't laughing. Because buried in the absurdity, beneath the sage smoke and the captions and the heartbreak merch, was a terrifying truth. She didn't even see me go. Not really. In her mind, I wasn't a man who left. I was a metaphor, a mirror, a masculine archetype collapsing under the weight of its own unconscious shadow. She didn't grieve me. She grieved the idea of me, the part she thought she could transform, heal, monetize. And I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired. So deeply tired of being converted into symbols, into data, into something useful for someone else's narrative. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want justice. I wanted non-existence, at least to her. I deleted my old phone number, deactivated all social media. I stopped checking email. For a few days, it worked, until I got the message from her assistant. Yes, apparently, she now had an assistant. His name was Orion, and his email was terrifyingly polite. Wesley, Arlena will be traveling for a 3-week, alone-together desert retreat, but she asked me to reach out on her behalf. She respects your sovereign choice and hopes you'll consider attending a final coherence circle before your energies part permanently. She believes this would be deeply healing for your inner masculine and would bring karmic closure to the union arc. I stared at the screen for 10 full minutes. She wanted a coherence circle. After ghosting me emotionally for a year, grading my every breath, inviting her ex into our marriage, building a secret backup candidate, and turning my departure into digital product, she wanted a coherence circle. I closed the laptop, and for the first time in years, I laughed until I cried. Because if that's not closure, I don't know what is. 2 weeks into my basement exile, I started to forget what sunlight felt like on my face. My brother would leave coffee on the top step like I was some kind of quarantined animal, then go back upstairs to his normal life, his normal wife, his normal kids, none of whom were ranking his aura or selling PDFs of his emotional failures online. Down there, surrounded by boxes of old Halloween decorations and a dusty rowing machine, I felt like a ghost waiting for someone to update his obituary. But slowly, something started to shift. The first morning I woke up and didn't check my phone. The second morning I went outside, barefoot, and let the cold grass bite at my skin without thinking about grounding practices or masculine containment fields. I sat under an actual tree, no crystals required, and ate a Pop-Tart like a free man. It tasted like cardboard and liberation. Then, on the 15th day, someone knocked on the basement door. Not the front door upstairs, the little half-sized one that opens out onto the side yard. I froze. Nobody knew I was here except my brother. I waited, hoping they'd go away. The knock came again, slower, deliberate. I opened it, and there she was. Not Arlena, at least not the Arlena I knew. This version looked smaller, rawer, stripped of her robes and ceremony. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, hair messy, no makeup, eyes rimmed red from crying or sleeplessness or both. In her hands, she held my binder, the same one she'd turned into a product. Except now the cover was torn off, the pages bent and smudged, like she'd been carrying it around as a talisman and finally realized it wasn't magic. She didn't ask to come in. She just looked at me and said, "You left before the ending." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "There was nothing left to end," I said. She glanced around the yard like she was expecting cameras, then back at me. I canceled everything. The circles, the retreats, the followers. Theo's gone. Cedric's gone. It's just me now, and I don't even know who that is. For the first time in months, she sounded like a person instead of a pamphlet, and I hated how my heart twitched at that, how part of me still wanted to step forward and fix her, to be the man who rescues the broken coach from her own labyrinth. But that wasn't my job anymore. It never had been. I said, "You built a machine. I just stopped running in it." She looked down at the binder and whispered, "I didn't know how else to hold you." Silence stretched between us. Behind me, the basement smelled of damp concrete and regret. In front of me, she was shaking, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. She wasn't the priestess anymore. She was just Arlena, and she was afraid. "I'm not coming back," I said quietly. "Not to the temple, not to the trial, not to the story. You can heal, but you'll have to do it without me as your metaphor. She nodded once, a jerky little motion, and stepped back. For a second it looked like she might say something else, but instead she set the binder down on the grass, turned, and walked toward the street. No robes, no candles, no followers live-streaming her heartbreak. Just a woman walking away from a basement door she shouldn't have found. I stood there until she disappeared around the corner, the binder between us like a gravestone for a marriage. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel graded. I didn't feel like a project. I just felt empty. And in that emptiness, a strange kind of relief. When I finally bent down and picked up the binder, a piece of paper fluttered out from inside. Not one of mine, hers. Handwritten, shaky. It said, "The temple is closed. Thank you for leaving before you drowned." I sat on the step holding that scrap of paper, realizing that the trial, the binder, the entire circus had finally burned itself out. But just as a faint smile crept across my face, my brother called down from the kitchen. "Hey, some guy named Cedric just left you a voicemail. Says he needs to talk. Says it's urgent." And just like that, the basement wasn't quiet anymore. I stared at the phone for a long time before I played Cedric's message. His voice was as smug as ever, with that slow, intentional rhythm that made everything sound like it was supposed to be wise, even when it was nonsense. But this time, it was different. No talk of energetic fields. No passive-aggressive spiritual diagnoses. Just a pause, and then, "Hey man, I heard what happened. I don't know if you'll ever want to talk to me, but for what it's worth, I was wrong. You were never the beta. You were just the only one being real. I'm sorry." That was it. No offer to meet. No vague invitation to a forgiveness retreat. Just a voice that sounded tired. Human. Maybe even humbled. I didn't call him back. I didn't need to. The apology wasn't for reconciliation. It was a receipt. Proof that even the people who tried to rewrite me had seen the truth, eventually. And that truth had nothing to do with masculine archetypes or sacred roles. It was just this. I stayed kind longer than I should have. I left quietly when it would have been easier to explode. And in the end, I didn't burn the temple. I just walked away before it collapsed. That night, I had dinner with my brother and his family. Real food. No herbs, no spiritual intentions, just spaghetti, bread, and cheap wine. We laughed over nothing. We watched a dumb comedy. His kids made fun of my haircut. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe. Not evaluated. Not molded. Just included. A week later, I moved out of the basement and into a little apartment above a hardware store 2 towns over. Small space. Quiet. My name on the lease. My coffee in the cupboard. No energy readings, no committee meetings, no laminated affirmations. Just a couch, a bookshelf, a keyboard, and the start of something new. I got a job doing basic QA work again. Low pressure, low stakes. I didn't tell anyone about my past. Didn't talk about the trial. That version of me was still healing, not broken, just bruised, but lighter than before. One afternoon, I went to a used bookstore downtown. There was a woman in the poetry section wearing headphones, mouthing the words to whatever she was listening to. I smiled at the way she didn't seem to care that she looked ridiculous. She was just happy. Present. She caught me looking and pulled her earbuds out. "Do I sing that bad?" "No," I said. "You sing like nobody's grading you." She grinned. "Best way to sing, right?" We talked. Her name was June. She didn't ask me about chakras or my inner child. She asked me what made me laugh. What made me mad. What I ate for breakfast. She told me she likes sad songs and noisy coffee shops and stories that don't end perfectly. Neither of us brought up past relationships. There was no need. We weren't building a temple. Just talking. Like people. Like equals. And in that moment, I realized something. Love isn't a test. It's not a spreadsheet. It's not a goddamn binder. It's sitting next to someone who isn't trying to fix you. And realizing, maybe you're not broken. I don't know what's next. But I do know this. There will be no more trials. Just life. Lived honestly. And that's more than enough.